Tell me the four things you need to do to watch this episode.
You need alcohol, you need short-term memory, you need more alcohol, and you need a lobotomy. You can forget about this movie.
And here. Welcome to Crosscut, everyone, and welcome to any newcomers as well. This week, we decided to do the movie Sucker Punch, thanks to our contributor, Johnny.
Thanks, Johnny.
Thank you. Also, if anyone else wanted to do a contribution through Buy Me a Coffee to maybe suggest a review for a movie that you want on Crosscut, go ahead. Here's the link right here. Sucker Punch. I think I've only seen this movie once before, and I just remember parts of it. And oh hey.
I'm glad we're actually on the same page because I was watching this. I've never seen this movie before. I have a funny
Oh,
little story that goes with this movie. If you want to hear about it, it's a little sad. Um, I'm
okay.
taking the glasses off for this. So
Oh no.
this movie came out in March of 2011, right?
Hmm.
So this was a year before we went to Full Sail together.
Yeah.
I was working at my well, first off, when I started watching this movie, I couldn't help but think, oh my God, we're going back to an insane asylum. Like, weren't we just here with Shutter Island, Stonehurst Asylum? We were just at the insane asylums. Now we're back.
Now
I'm
we're
going
back.
crazy because now we keep going back to the loony bin. March of 2011, I was working at an office in Buffalo, and I started talking to this girl that I worked with, and we
Oh.
both liked each other,
Oh.
and we agreed that we were going to go out on a date. I'd never been on a date before in my life, so this would have been my first date ever.
Okay.
And the only thing I could think of was, well, let's go see a movie, right? Date seems like a pretty safe bet.
Sure.
The only movie that was playing that opening weekend was Sucker Punch. Long story short, she blows me off, and I go to the theater. I wasn't really sure if she was going to show up, honestly, because she actually like kind of quit like the week before we were supposed to go. So I didn't really know what to expect. So I just showed up and I was like, I guess we'll just see if she shows up. And the
Hmm.
movie we were going to go see was Sucker Punch because it was the only movie out at the time. And she didn't show up. I said, well, my first ever attempt at a date. I went home. And looking back, years later, I'm glad she didn't show up because that would have saved me the mental anguish of having to watch this movie.
There's several things about this movie that are cringy, to say the least. First of all, I actually do like the intro of it. That I actually did like. You know how,
See, I don't like the intro of it.
really?
Yeah, I don't. It's just so my interpretation of this movie is like it's Zack Snyder trying to make a Zack Snyder movie. I mean, this movie really is like this movie almost felt like it was a practice for what was
Mhm.
to come with like Justice League. Batman, like so many of these shots reminded me of like Batman versus Superman.
That I do agree that a lot of the slow motion visual effects, like
Yeah.
very Man of Steel,
Like
very,
high angle at the cemetery looking down. Yeah,
yeah.
I just like this, like him trying to do that kind of stuff before. And I think Zack Snyder's a hell of a director. I really
Mhm.
enjoy him, but I think his best stuff comes when it's adapted and not when it's an original idea. I don't know if you had watched or even heard about the Rebel Moon movies that came out on Netflix the last year.
I haven't
They're like
seen it yet.
I don't think those are original ideas, but I mean they are just getting like panned, like terrible reviews.
I think he really needs good source material to make a good movie. You think
Mhm.
of Watchmen, Dawn of the Dead, 300, that's good source material. He had Justice League, hit or miss with some of the stuff he did. I like Batman vs Superman. I might be in the minority on that, but I actually like that movie. Man of Steel, I think, is still pretty decent.
Yeah.
Justice League, the director's cut is pretty solid. So
Yeah.
if he has good source material, I think he can make a good movie. But you look at like Sucker Punch, you look at his new movies, which is those Rebel Moon movies, which I don't know if those are original ideas. I do think they're based off of something. I'll look it up. But anyways, yeah, I just think original material he has struggles with.
I didn't mind, like I said, I don't mind the intro because the actual asylum part of it, I actually liked the way it looked. And seeing Oscar Isaac so young in that movie.
Yeah, when he popped up on screen, I was like, "Oh wow, this is like kind of the beginning of Oscar Isaac because this was
Yeah.
2011." The only other thing that I could think of that he was in that year was the movie Drive, which was the first thing I ever remember him from.
Ooh.
And this was before Drive, so this is technically probably one of his first big movies. The
Oh yeah.
thing that was like this movie is very confusing. The editing is really confusing
It is.
because there's scenes where I mean they try to make it visual. They try to do visual references to show what they're in reality versus fantasy,
Right.
right? Oscar Isaac clean shaven is reality, Oscar Isaac mustache is fantasy. And then even beyond that, you have like your fantasy within a fantasy. But it was just
Right.
confusing because there's a scene where the main girl, she's trying to explain to the other girls about the items they need to get,
Right.
and she's telling them, and there's like quick shots of like each item, and it goes from like the reality and then one shots them in the fantasy, and it was just like,
That's true.
yeah, I'm just like, what is going on right now?
Yeah, that that is very confusing. And at the very beginning, you see that a lot going in and out, in and out. And then towards the middle part is just a fantasy, and then the fantasy.
Did this movie remind you of just like when I watched it, I felt like I was watching like a video game. It reminded me a lot of like a video game.
Especially when they're in when the fantasy.
Hmm.
Yes, definitely. Like the very first one was the Nazis, World War II kind of thing.
Yeah.
I didn't actually mind that because it's like a period piece, but the fighting, I, it's just yes,
It's
all big tough people, guns and everything, and little baby doll with a samurai sword.
yeah. When I saw that big second one, I just couldn't help but think this is like Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter had a baby.
Yeah, you know what? Speaking of video games, it kind of it's reminded me of World of Warcraft.
Yeah. Yeah,
You
the
know, with
creatures
all
and everything,
the
yeah.
creatures, the like knights and everything with the dragons.
Just yeah, so much of the like because it's very much like, oh, you need to collect these items and then you go on these side quests,
Mhm.
and it just
Mhm.
reminded like I felt like it was like watching like a video game adaptation or something. It's just
Although there is one scene, the very first one, where she's like in the cold element, and you have like the three samurais going after her. I like the aesthetic of what it was, like the big samurai creatures going after her. I was okay all the way up until they actually start fighting, because then
yeah.
it looked ridiculous. But
Yeah, the
hey,
Johnny, if you're I'm sorry, man.
you ruined us. You ruined us.
You know, I don't think I did this movie justice because I did have to watch it in parts, unfortunately, because I watched it yesterday because I thought we were gonna film yesterday, and I got it from the library actually. I
Huh.
went to the library, got the movie, and I had to unfortunately watch it in parts just because I was working throughout the
Hmm.
day. So I said, okay, I'll watch it in chunks, and it doesn't help because it's a movie. A movie should be watched beginning to end, no breaks. Of
Hmm.
course, I'm watching it on my shitty TV, and this movie, if it was seen in theaters, maybe it was a more enjoyable experience.
Hmm.
There's scenes at the end though. So there's the scene where Oscar Isaac kills the two of the girls, right?
Right.
And the one girl's screaming and Carla Gugina is like, "No!" And just like
Right.
it's a
Yeah.
very emotional scene. And like when I was watching that, I kept thinking, I feel like I've seen this same scene in another movie that was so effective. But for some reason in this movie, it doesn't work. And I think the reason it didn't work is because a scene like that needs to be grounded in reality. And this movie is
Mhm.
just far from that. Like a scene where like characters are dying and you're crying. I just feel like it wasn't. it just wasn't clicking for me because the characters were so far from this being like anything real to me.
With that scene in particular, I think it was rushed, especially with the drama part of her screaming and everything. And it's just like, and she just shuts up at the end, and they take her away. And it was like it felt so rushed. There was nothing like for that. You don't really see that in the real world in the asylum at all.
Well,
All
you
you
barely
s-
see the asylum at all. Like,
right.
yeah.
But even when you at the end, when you they come back to reality, all you see is
Back to
this.
reality. Oh, there goes gravity. Oh, there goes rabbit.
Reality. Oh, there goes gravity. Oh, there goes gravity.
Well, you see Oscar Isaac's wound and
Yeah,
the actual lobotomy.
right.
But like that was it. They don't
Yeah.
explain anything else except the very, very end with Sweet Pea. But I wanted to see more in the reality of the chaos that happened.
Do you think I was gonna ask because when I was watching this, I kept thinking I feel like this movie could have been better if the majority was set in reality and
Hmm.
then she goes into the fantasy to get away from that reality. But essentially the movie is her already in a fantasy going into a deeper fantasy, right?
Right.
And I just thought like if she was like if half this movie was set real world psych
Mhm.
asylum and then she goes into the fantasy to get away from that. I thought that would have been more effective.
I believe so too. I don't know. This something just bothered me every time. Something very stupid too. Like you never see her dance ever.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. I was like, I mean, I guess action scenes are more exciting, but it's just I thought it was funny because they're like, "You're such a good dancer," and I remember thinking like, "But we never even seen her dance."
I was even thinking like, oh, when the high roller comes, that's when you're actually going to see her dance. Forget it.
Yeah,
Not one shot is of her dancing.
right,
Like, damn, that bothered me through the whole movie. Like, are we actually going to see her dance? Her magnificent dance that captures everyone?
right. It's because I just like I kept thinking if you actually showed her dancing, it just would have been kind of boring, you know? Like it would just would have it not would have been it would just not
Well,
have been exciting
but I
compared to a
thought,
big action sequence.
well, the thing is, it would. I think it would have been cool if she starts dancing and is going back and forth, kind of like in the Fifth Element, when you see the opera singer, she's singing, she's moving while going some action, and it cuts back and forth. I thought it was gonna be like that. That would have been more entertaining. It just went directly to the other fantasy, which is,
Mhm.
oi, it's just damn,
This movie's a lot. It's kind of
it's all over.
sensory overload. It is all
Oh,
over the place. You said you've seen this movie before. Do you remember what your initial reaction was?
I mean, I saw this once and I did not remember it at all. I just remember parts of it. And the parts I remember were the fantasy parts. When she's like flying through the air with flips and the train and stuff like that. Uh, that fantasy part though, I didn't mind the train sequence
Kind of a Wizard of Oz vibe at all with the
with the train.
like no, not just at the train, but like the whole metaphor of
Oh,
like, where it's all these people in her real life, but it's not really happening. It's more of like a dream. And then
hmm.
she's gonna wake up from the dream, and all those people from the dream were actually in her life the whole time. Like I was wondering if that was like maybe like a little inspiration for the movie.
I mean, I can see it. I mean, it has the same elements for it. The high rollers, the doctor, and the Oscar Isaac with the quarterly. Yeah, I mean, I can see it.
I will say this. I like the ending. I actually enjoyed the ending. I thought the ending worked for me, where Sweet Pea's getting on the bus. And I mean, for some reason, Scott Glenn is the bus driver. Sure. I mean, at that point, I was just like, fuck it, who cares?
Yeah.
But I did
Also.
like his little spiel that he gives to her. He's like, you just have a seat, and
Mhm.
we're about to, take off.
Yeah.
I kind of like that shot where they're driving off and there's like the cornfields and the little scarecrow. But So I did like the ending, maybe like the last 10 minutes, so that saved the movie a little bit for me. It redeemed it a bit.
I agree. I agree. It was very nice to look at. Very calm versus every crazy thing in the rest of the movie.
This
But
movie has a doesn't this movie have like a R-rated director's cut? I might be wrong.
no. Fun fact, actually, Zack Snyder wants to fix it, and
Oh, okay.
that he said that he wants to fix Sucker Punch, but he needs the help from fans. Yeah, he like
Okay.
fund the fix of Sucker Punch.
I mean, I thought this movie maybe would have been more enjoyable if it was an R rating. And Zack Snyder's pretty good with his R-rated movies. This is
Mhm.
actually his first PG-13 at that point in his career because Dawn of the Dead, 300, Watchmen,
Those are definitely
all
all rated R.
yeah. So this
But
was
then Man of
actually I think
Steel
his
came out
first,
with PG-13.
but that was after
Oh,
this.
well, yeah.
So I mean, this was kind of the start of his PG-13ness.
Hmm.
And I don't think the format fits him that well. You know, even Justice League, the director's edition, was much better because it was kind of like just a unrated version. I think he's just that fits his aesthetic way better
Hmm.
when it's R rated than compared to
They're
PG
more
13.
entertaining.
I don't know if this movie would have benefited though from it being rated R. I mean, maybe the violence could have been more gory and maybe that would have been a bit more appealing, but I
Yeah.
just thought the story was it was the story is just very
The,
generic.
the story is not good. It's
No.
like it said, it's all over the place, back and forth with the realities. It's I don't know. I don't even like the acting.
I don't mind the acting. I thought the acting was fine. I don't mind the girls. I think Oscar Isaac's pretty good. For the most part, I thought the acting
Well,
was
okay.
fine.
I take that back. Some of the acting. Because I did like Rocket's acting. I liked Sweet Pea and all the rest of the I really did not like Baby Doll.
Yeah, if I had to pick one that I just didn't care for, it probably would have been her, which she's
Yeah.
pretty, for a main character, she's so
Bleh.
like, yeah, yeah, like literally. And maybe that was maybe part of the point because at the end, doesn't she say, "This wasn't my story, this is yours"? But
Right.
also, it's just like, what the fuck does that mean? So,
Yeah. Like
I mean, I really didn't care about anybody's story, Like, I think the strongest attempt was Sweet Pea and Rocket sisters, but even then, I'm just like,
I
I
feel
don't
like
care.
that was probably the only like good chemistry I saw.
Yeah, like Vanessa Hudgens, Blondie,
Hmm.
she's really there's nothing to her
She's just there.
character. She's just there. Jamie Chung,
I mean, in the
uh,
fantasy, she was all right, but that's about it for me.
you just don't really get to know them. And I think maybe
Not
going back
really.
to the idea of it maybe being grounded more in reality, having those scenes in the actual psych ward, maybe would have been more meaningful because it would have felt like you're actually getting to know these characters more.
Yeah, because it pretty much depicts everyone as the same kind of person. They were trapped in there and now they can't go anywhere.
I just
That's
thought it would
that's
have been, yeah, if you could have seen like them actually in the psych ward, being real people, finding out why they're there, you could have
hmm
had more compassion for them. And then when you do the fantasy scenes, you can have that emotion where Rocket gets killed and then cuts back to maybe like her actually getting killed in reality, but
hmm
she's still getting killed in a fantasy. It just I don't know. It's just like this movie was trying to be like kind of Inception-y, even though
Yeah, they tried.
Incept by the time this movie was when this movie was being made, Inception had not even come out yet. So to be fair, it's not like they were ripping off Inception, but
But it's
it's
an
an
old
old
story
idea
of,
of
of
like a layer
dream
within a layer.
fantasy.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I just didn't like fantasy within a fantasy. It's too much.
It
It
was
should have
too
been more
much.
grounded. I think it should have been more grounded. I don't know. I'm finding hard things to like about this movie. I'm sorry, Johnny. I'm so-
Oh, he
I
loves
didn't
Sucker
like
Punch,
it.
so we're gonna hear it afterwards.
I'm sorry. I'm curious. I mean, I would love to know his history with the movie. If he had seen it maybe back when it first came out, I can respect that. You know, if you'd seen it when it first came out in theaters, I don't know if I'll be honest, I don't know if I would have still liked this movie if I'd seen it in theaters. Within the first 5 minutes, I was already pretty turned off by the movie. Yeah, I was surprised it wasn't streaming anywhere for a movie that kind of bombed. You'd think it'd be available somewhere at this point,
At
but
least Tubi or something,
something. But
but nothing.
no, Johnny wants to do us dirty.
Well, Johnny, comment below, see how we did on this awesome movie that you recommended.
I'm sorry, Johnny. I did not like this one overall. It just didn't work for me. I like Zack Snyder, but I don't think this is a good Zack Snyder movie.
That kind of wraps up our review for Sucker Punch. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, spread the word of Crosscut.
Yeah, next week we'll be finishing off the trifecta of the Robert Rodriguez Film School by watching Red 11.
Yay, Red 11. So stay tuned.
And that's it. Cut, print, moving on.
Whoops.